Monsieur Patzer.
Mr. Patzer, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Peters, do you have any aspirations to be a board member yourself one day?
Sure.
Okay. What would be the board salaries that people would get on the board for Stripe?
I do not know.
Do they get stock options?
I do not know how their compensation is set.
Bonuses? Are there bonuses that are paid out? Do you know?
I don't know, but I would surmise that they're not. It's not performance-based.
It's not performance-based. Interesting. Okay. So any shares in the company or anything like that? Is that part of it at all?
I actually do not know how the compensation is set.
Okay. So I mean, you'd want to be a board member one day, but you don't actually even know what the compensation would be of it. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I've served on boards of nonprofits. It's as most boards provide a strategic and advice role to leadership of the organizations that they're part of. That is, I think, worthwhile work. Okay,
I'm a little bit concerned here because basically you've come here today and just said that you're okay with ripping off Canadians. 2.9% is the fee here. What's the fee in the United States?
Comparable.
But it's not the same.
I believe it's 15 bips less, but I'll confirm that.
2.7%? Is that what it is? What's your website says? 2.7%, right?
It's on our website.
Okay, per transaction in Canada is 30 cents. In the U.S., what is in the U.S. per transaction?
Per transaction cost?
Yeah.
I don't have that information at hand today, I'm sorry.
Okay, and then the extra fee, what would the extra fee be?
I believe it's 30 cents.
I think it's 30 cents in Canada, but in the United States?
Off the top of my head, I actually forget at the moment.
Well, you came from Washington. You live in the United States. You think you don't know what that in the U.S. it is? On the website, it's 5 cents. Okay, so why are you ripping off Canadians?
We did pass through the reduction. And for our users on flat rate pricing, we're shielding them from what would otherwise be a cost increase. And we haven't raised our prices in over 8 years.
Okay, what percentage on volume is a decrease then? If you said you've passed on a decrease, what percentage is that then on volume? What is that percentage?
For businesses on interchange plus pricing who it's just passed through, the amount of reduction they get is exactly what the card networks agreed to provide.
Earlier today you said that it was such a small change what the government was working for you on that you weren't going to pass it along. Yet we see what this has done for we look at your revenue, the way it's just skyrocketed over time. I can tell you that a small difference is big. And I'm just going to use my own quick little story here. Many years ago, I worked construction making $14 an hour. I got a 50-cent pay raise. That was a lot of money for me, even though it was only 50 cents an hour. A small difference, a small amount makes a big difference for people and for companies in particular. Small businesses that are trying to get by here, they're looking to maybe expand their operations. That small number is a huge difference. So why on earth, especially if you've got a strategic advisor to the Prime Minister, why are you not passing along these savings to small businesses?
Well, I understand what you're saying, that a small amount can make a difference. In this case, you have to think about it in context of the many other things that a small business would care about. They care about increasing their sales. They care about having things work really well and being simple. And what we should be doing is considering it from their perspective, what are all of these things relative to one another? And we thought long and hard about this, and we looked at the small reduction relative to what they might lose, which is simple, clear pricing, and we felt like that was not a good trade-off. There are ways to make this more workable, and had we been involved in this negotiation, if it wasn't just a small set of parties.
But you are part of the negotiation, because at the end of the day, you have the strategic advisor to the Prime Minister on your board. You are involved in negotiations here. So quickly, what percentage of volume of transactions are on interchange plus pricing versus standard pricing in Canada?
We really were not involved in this negotiation. We found out about it just like the other witness in the news.
Yeah, Mark Carney's been on the board for over 2 months, though. This guy is part of the negotiations with the government. He's like, this guy is directly involved here. Like,
With respect, the board is not involved in this, and no board member, to my knowledge, has been involved in public policy advocacy in Canada.
so you're confident in telling this committee that Mark Carney is not involved in putting any lobbying or any strategic advice or public policy advice to the government of Canada?
I am confident that no, not to my knowledge, any board member has been involved in public policy advocacy in Canada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patzer and
The
Mr.
floor is yours for
Peters.
6 minutes.
And thank you, witnesses, for being here at this early start in the morning. My first question is for Mr. Brownlee. Mr. Brownlee, you represent convenience stores, small businesses across the country. We've had testimony. Most people know that these merchant fees range between 1% to 3%. What do your businesses on average pay as a percentage of sales, the merchant fee that's charged as a percentage of sales?
It varies by store and by banner. It can range anywhere from, well, let's use gas for an example, anywhere from 1 to up to 6 cents, depending on what's going on. And I'll give you an example. Last year, the fees are so high that in Atlantic Canada, where they have regulated margins on fuel, a lot of the retailers out east were offering up to a 7 cent a liter discount if you paid by indirect debit or cash. So the fees are they're pretty astronomical in what we do or what our banners go through on a daily basis. But the reality is, though, is just we are very unique because of the nature of the products we sell. Taxes are layered a lot on fuel, whether in tobacco.
No, I understand that. Sorry to interrupt, my time's limited. So, but the upper end generally is about 3%, right?
It is correct, but it depends also. That doesn't take into consideration some of the premium plans for some of these card holders, because as Mr. Lampron said in his opening, that basically the points are on the backs of the retailers.
Yeah, I got it. Mr. Peters, Stripe's been very successful. I've read in the Financial Times and other places that you grew by 25% last year overall globally. You just said in Canada, I think it was in Canada, that you grew by 50% in the last 2 years. Is that correct?
Companies on Stripe have seen their payment volume grow by 50%. It's the companies that we support have grown.
But you're fairly successful. It's I know as a private company, some of the stuff's not public. But can you tell me? I understand that last year the global revenue may have been around $14 billion. Can you tell me what the revenue was in Canada for Stripe last year?
We don't confirm or discuss private financials.
So your operating profit margins, none of those things you will disclose publicly. So it's very difficult to understand where other of your competitors are public, what your profit margins are. But it's a fairly profitable business because it's an electronic business. You said, and very proud of your growth. So when you make the decision to basically say no to the government on their claim that they're lowering merchant fees, in your management structure, where does that go? Does that go beyond Canada? Does that involve your head office, which I believe is in California?
Our management team is spread around. We do have we're over 100 employees in Canada. We're a distributed
So
workforce.
where's the decision made?
Decisions are made collectively by individuals from a range of offices and locations across North America.
And when you make
a
major decision like that to basically defy the government of Canada, does that get discussed at your board?
This pricing decision was not discussed at the board level. The board is not involved in this.
The board is not involved. Okay. So I'd like to go back to this issue of the claim that you provide this great flat rate pricing. On your website, your flat rate pricing in Canada is 2.9% plus a 30-cent fee, according to your website. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So 2.9% of the value of the transaction gets charged, right? So as the value of that transaction rises, the value of the revenue or the amount of revenue the overall system gets also rises. but the cost doesn't really change on the transaction. It's an electronic transaction. So as you go up, you're making more revenue, which means that your profit margin probably goes up the more expensive the transaction is, correct?
Actually, that's incorrect. When costs go up, we hold that flat rate the same. And like I said, costs have gone up. And this year, costs are net up. Costs fluctuate. Card network costs fluctuate all the time. There are hundreds of different fluctuations.
When it's based on the price of the goods, the amount of money that comes in rises every time on the transaction, right? If I go from a $100 transaction to a $200 transaction, the revenue you get on a $200 transaction in numbers is more than you get on $100.
On a percentage basis, that's true. However, our percentage has remained the same for 8 years.
Well, of course, because as inflation drives costs up and transactions go up, and we've seen massive inflation, you get a massive revenue boost without having to change your prices.
Well, actually, we've held our price the same for 8 years.
No, you've held your percentage the same. Your revenue's not the same. It's growing exponentially because of inflation and because the cost of the basket size that gets charged goes up. It's a false claim to say that you're not making more money. So why is it that when you're making that much more money, are you that much less efficient than your competitors like Moneris and others who have agreed to this price change and you're refusing to do it? Are you that poorer a company in your technology that you can't take this modest price cut?
We've held our price the same for 8 years. I can't think of many other products where the prices have stayed the same for 8 years.
Your competitors are lowering the price and dealing with the competitor. So, and you're saying it's because your costs have gone up. Why do your costs go up when theirs aren't?
In my opening remarks, I pointed out two things. Yes, net costs are up, and so the flat rate shields those businesses from what would otherwise be a cost increase. We are also taking a principled position in support of simple pricing. Our concern with the government's announcement...
Taking a principled position in terms of keeping and maintaining the growth in your profit margin and your revenue and not passing it on, where other companies who are your competitors are respecting the fact that, unlike Europe and other places, we charge high-fee merchant fees here, and you're unwilling like Moneris, TD Capital, Chase Merchants, Global Payments, you're unwilling to do what they are doing. And you're not the only one. There are other companies that have remained silent. But it's incredible to me that when your revenue goes up as inflation drives the basket up, that you're unwilling to say, you know what, we're making a lot of money here. We're going to participate in making it easier on all the merchants in this country in doing this. I would think, and maybe it's just because, you know, Canada's small for a global company like you guys that are operating around the world, that you don't care about what the government and what taxpayers and what businesses need here, as long as you can keep going at your 2.9%, which is the most expensive, as we've just heard, in the industry, that it's 1% to 3%. You're at the high end of the charging. You got lots of room to cut.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. We're out of time, way over time actually, but MP area.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Peters, you said, I think it was 100 employees in Canada. Is that correct?
Last time I checked, we were over 100 employees, yes.
Okay. So where are they located?
The last time I looked, we were across, I believe, 7 provinces. We just opened a new office. We had an office previously, but we opened a new, larger office in Toronto just a few weeks ago.
Okay. And what are your revenues in Canada?
That's unfortunately sensitive commercial information that I'm not able to share.
So you can't share the revenue. What would be the average salary employee remuneration then?
Well, we're a technology company, and we're always looking for the best talent. Many of the job openings we have in Canada right now are for engineering roles, and we're competing around the world for the best talent. Those are very high-paying jobs.
So what is the specific reason why you can't share your revenue earned in Canada? I'd like to know specifically from that. And is that a board directive, or is that your personal opinion, or is that from the CEO? Specifically, where does that directive of not sharing that information come from? Because we know your percentages, but we're trying to figure out exactly what value Stripe and other finance companies have to the Canadian economy. And we can't do that without getting an idea of your profit margins and the value we offer it. And also, when you're talking about 100 employees across Canada, I'd like to have a comparison, because I get that coming from an area where, you know, tool and die manufacturing and so forth, we know all those things, and we know what people do. So can you tell me the 100 employees, what specifically job qualifications and actually not qualifications, categories you have, and also again back to the directive of why not you can't share that information. Where does it come from?
So there's a few questions there. In terms of revenue growth, we exist primarily because of the success of the businesses in Canada that we support. Our growth is growth that goes along with their growth. In terms of our ability to comment on information about our financials, that is company-wide policy. It is set by management. We are a private company.
Okay, so management provide us the names and the address of the management people we can actually ask that question to.
I think that they would be telling you the exact same information.
Who are they? Who are they? Names and addresses we can actually ask them.
I would be happy to follow up with you. Perhaps in a more private setting, we can give you a little bit more.
No, it's not a private setting.
Understanding.
It's like you're telling us right now under oath at a committee that there's management people that cannot disclose information. So you know who they are. So I would like to know who they are and the addresses so that the clerk and our researchers can actually engage those individuals.
I'd be happy to follow up with you, but I can tell you a company-wide policy, we're a private company. You're asking for private sensitive business information. We are under no obligation to provide anything like that. We would like to give you a deeper understanding of how our business works, and I would be happy to do that.
Well, I'm asking you right now, you are telling us you can't give us information at a...
Mr. Massey, you're on mute.
Just to continue, Mr. Chair, is that this is a public hearing and asking for specific information is being denied to me, but I would like to know, and I think under our laws, I have the right to know who is making that decision. I may not get that information, but at the same time, we as a committee should know who that person is, where they actually operate from, that is making a decision that Mr. Peters is providing testimony for in front of us here today. So I would like to know specifically why Stripe can't provide that type of information, where they actually operate from, and who they are. I think that's not going to compromise their company.
Mr. Massey, I would be happy to give you a better sense of how we operate, where our employees are distributed around the world. Much of that information is actually on our website. And to the extent that I can give you some sort of broader understanding of the way our business works and effectively what we do to support small businesses, which is what I thought was the subject of the hearing today, I'd be happy to do that.
Well, it is, but here's the issue is that we have a cost issue that is being passed on to individuals like convenience stores like Mr. Brownlee and others. And we're trying to get an understanding in terms of the value of Stripe and other types of businesses in this. And all I'm simply asking is who actually runs Stripe in Canada, where they're located, and how do we contact them? So Mr. Peters, where do you work from? Where do you actually have your office?
I'm responsible for public policy in Canada. I am a good point of contact for the committee and for any member of Parliament that would like to understand Stripe better.
Well, I asked where you actually work from.
I work from Washington, D.C.
Okay, so what's the address of Washington, D.C.? So you came in from Washington, D.C. to our committee here, and I had to actually spend most of my time just to drill down on that point. So I'll conclude this with, Mr. Chair, is that this is just totally unacceptable. We can't even get an idea of Stripe in Canada without actually having to spend time on the committee like this.
Thank you, Mr. Massey, MP.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Peters, again, I was trying to figure out the value of what Stripe does for Canadians. We have about 100 employees, and specifically, what type of employees do you actually have in your organization? What's the top job classification and description? And where do you post for employment for Stripe? You come from Washington, D.C., but I'm just wondering whether any of your Canadian operations post publicly for positions, and what would that position be, the predominant one?
Our hiring in Canada is predominantly for engineers. We're a technology company.
What type of engineers?
Oh gosh, there are going to be all types. I'd actually love to follow up with you to make sure I get a better sense of that.
I really don't need you to follow up. I need actually information at this hearing right now. I mean, quite frankly, and I find it offensive that we're supposed to follow up individually when this is actually a hearing here in the Canadian Parliament, and you've come in from Washington, D.C., and there's nobody capable in Canada to answer these questions, apparently. And so if you're going to talk about engineers being the predominant position, that's a broad category. It's not one that's, financially, I guess, in terms of your operations, I'd like to know what specifically those types of engineers are.
So I can try to address that. Look, we have a number of products, and engineers may have distinct specialities, but oftentimes we're hiring to power a specific product or a specific expansion. And there would actually be a variety of those. It's not that there is a specific business unit or product division that we are supporting solely with our Canada presence. So it really will be a mix. And I wish I could explain the different types of engineering talents that are out there, but that's just not my qualification. I would be happy to follow up and table it with the committee. There's no that type of hiring is something we're proud of, and we'd be very happy to share it. I just I can't quite qualify.
Well, I'm not trying to be difficult here, but I'm trying to drill down in terms of the cost and the profits, which won't be shared at this committee at this particular time. We're going to have to actually pursue that ourselves, I think, at this committee, of the value of Stripe for the Canadian economy, the types of positions and the remuneration and the value added. And then on top of that, it's going to be the cost recovery that we want to make for small, medium-sized businesses. So I'll conclude with this, is that all that information should be made available to the committee, not backroom lobbying that might be the tradition or the culture you're used to in Washington, but it's not here in Canada the same way.
Well, if I may respond, Mr. Massey, we've been publicly transparent about our pricing, unlike anybody else in the market. It's all on our website, and I would be happy to discuss as much of this publicly as I can. I agree.
Sure,
with you.
then pull out the profits and the margins and all the things that we need to do as a committee to understand the value that Stripe and other types of organizations do for management of financial transactions. And that's where we need to find out where Canadians can be protected the most and small and medium-sized businesses can be more efficient. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. Monsieur Généreux, la parole est à vous.
Mr. Généreux, the floor is yours. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you to all the witnesses. Now, Mr. Peters, I can't get over your answers. It's beyond belief. I think that you're the worst witness we've ever had. I normally don't over-exaggerate. Mr. Généreux, I'd ask you to be polite. It's not courteous, and we have rules in this committee, so I'd ask you to be mindful of that. Well, listen, it's incredible that we've had no responses, non-responses. Basically, what you're saying is we can't have two categories of clients, so we'll keep the same rate across the board. And in order to have predictability and foreseeability so that everyone has the same cost levels. Now, in order to have predictability, to have a $1 rather than have it 65 cents, well, that would be predictable if it was 65 cents instead of $1 across the board. I don't see how that doesn't make sense. You could have lowered the rates if you'd wished to do so, but you didn't. And that's incredible. It's beyond belief. I'll stop there. Mr. Brownlee, Mr. Lampron, you referred to other countries that reduced their rates to 0.5 percentage point, if I understood correctly. For example, Australia, England, I think, too, a number of countries. Have there been any empirical studies carried out to demonstrate that that, in fact, helped SMEs? This is Small Business Week here in Canada, after all. Now, ostensibly, the government is handing out goodies, but it's not the case, as has been demonstrated this morning. There's this reduction of the flat rate that is applied in some countries. Has that benefited SMEs in any way? Mr. Brownlee first, please.
Existing empirical studies, but it's common sense. Obviously, the lower that the rates, the cheaper it is for the companies to process the cards, and the better it is overall for the economy. Like, that's basically what it comes down to.
Mr. Lampron.
Mr. Lampron. Well, I more or less agree with Mr. Brownlee. There are no studies that we've carried out in-house that demonstrate it, but it's logical, i.e. that reducing those rates would have that effect. And let me reiterate that those rates were reduced about a decade ago. So it makes sense that that would help consumers and small retail outlets. It's logical, and it could be applicable in a country like Canada, and it should apply to all retailers regardless of their annual turnover. Mr. Brownlee, earlier a number of witnesses referred to the differences between the big players in the world, Costco, Walmart, and so on and so forth, vis-a-vis the average SME. In terms of the overheads and total costs, is there a big difference between the small players and the big players?
There is. And just to go back to your other question, when you were talking about, studies, part of the challenge that we found, or our retailers found, in terms of lowering the rates, it's the hidden costs that creep in. To the credit card companies are very good at that you can have the rate as low as you want, but there are a lot of hidden costs that you have that creep in overall in terms of processing.
Mr. Lampron.
Mr. Lampron. Well, to some extent, there would be a difference logically, and that's why we're calling for an across-the-board 0.5% that would apply to all retailers. That would benefit not only consumers but small retailers. So I think that, yes, there would be quite a substantial difference. Question. Would you contend that the quote-unquote agreement, we'll call it that for the purposes of this morning, that this agreement that the government entered into with MasterCard and Visa is a broken promise? It amounts to a broken promise. Do you feel that the tangible reduction for most SMEs in Canada just never eventuated, that it was not up to par or snuff and didn't meet your expectations?
I don't know about a broken promise, but again, our convenience stores, les dépanneurs in Canada, they don't qualify for this because the threshold is too low. If you take a look at a convenience store that pumps gasoline, our margins or the overall sales are inflated, but the margins are still extremely low. So unfortunately, we worked with the government trying to explain the uniqueness of our industry and the fact that we do collect a number of taxes. And when we found out about this new agreement that came into place, it was when it was leaked to the media.
Mais ça répondait pas à vos besoins.
But it didn't meet your needs, basically. It didn't meet the needs of most of your members in any way whatsoever.
In any way, shape, or form.
Monsieur Lampron.
Mr. Lampron. Mr. Lampron. Well, if I may just chime in, that's why we're saying that by having such high interchange fees, it impoverishes consumers in our economy, generally speaking. That's why we want those fees to be as low as possible, to ensure that, well, especially in a context where there's rising prices, we've seen this in consumer studies, we want to ensure that prices are as low as these fees are as low as possible, and prices rather. And in order to have acceptable prices, let's put it that way, those interchange fees should be as low as possible. Now, the agreement with Visa and MasterCard has been in place for just a couple of days now, but I think that by reducing the fees to 0.5%, everyone would benefit, including our members and small retailers. Mr. Chair, apologies to Mr. Peters, if I may, but the fact remains that I'm extremely disappointed by his answers. You know, I think the committee should ensure that when witnesses appear before us, that they should be able to answer questions properly. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Peters, does Stripe use any offshore financial centers for either employees, mailboxes, or accounts?
I'm not sure what you mean by offshore centers. We're a global company. We have employees and all over the world. We have a significant number of partnerships with a variety of financial institutions, both large and small. If you can maybe direct me more specifically to some aspect of that.
Thank you. And I'm just trying to get it, again, this is about the value for what we get for small, medium-sized businesses, like the Canary Islands, Switzerland, Luxembourg, British Virgin Islands, Bermuda, Panama, Malta, Ireland. These are offshore financial centers that provide tax benefits that are preferable versus a nation like Canada. So can you tell me what employees or systems are in place in those countries for Stripe?
To be specific, I'd be happy to follow up with you. Some of those locations, I've never heard of anyone being there or us having any operations. We are headquartered in South San Francisco, actually double headquartered in Dublin and South San Francisco. Our founders are Irish. A significant number of our employees are based in Ireland. We have offices in London, like I said, Toronto, a few spots in the United States, Latin America, South Asia, Eastern Asia, and it's usually tied to the businesses that we're trying to serve in those regions.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. And Dublin, of course, is Ireland, and Ireland has favorable tax preferences for corporations to move money. This is part of what we're doing here at our committee, is to evaluate the value and the cost of the Canadian economy for the uses of services. Thank you, Mr. Chair.